Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited today because I have Mike DiLisio on the line. Say hello, Mike.
Hello, Ed. How are you?
I'm doing all right this morning. And Mike, you're currently full-time Dice Tower. You started in November,
Correct.
and you are going to be you're focused on video editing and content creation for the channel, right?
That's correct. Yes.
And go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and so originally I got to know you. I can't remember which game it was, but a lot of Pencil First games have solo games,
hmm
and whichever it was, maybe Herbaceous or Sunset Over Water, or probably one of the ones that Keith had done. You said I do solo reviews, or you did the solo review for it or preview, and that was before November, so this was like well before you were part of the Dice Tower.
Correct. Yes, I had, and it probably was herbaceous. I did a video for herbaceous sprouts as well, and sunset over water.
Right, right.
Those were
It would had to have been the first one. So if you did one for
yeah.
Herbaceous, it was Herbaceous.
Right. And I was focusing on playthroughs. That was kind of my
Yeah.
thing was doing solo playthroughs on a YouTube channel I called Solo Mode Reviews
Yeah.
or
Well,
Solo Mode Games.
so yeah, let's back up to that. I want a lot of people may not know how you got into games and got into the solo reviews. I think that's a great place to start. And then obviously being a part of the Dice Tower and solo games in general, I think is great topics. But to kick it off, sort of how did you end? What is your gaming upbringing, and how did that get you to solo games? And at what point were you like, I'm going to do videos? Like, how did that? What's that story?
Right. Well, I'll give you the short version.
Sure, sure.
Growing up, I had some exposure to games, but it wasn't a huge part of my family culture. We would play mass market games from here to there. Pinochle was probably the game that we played most regularly. I played that at my grandmother's house. But when I got into my young adulthood, this is kind of the cliche thing. I was introduced to Catan,
That
and that
game, that
yeah,
Catan game.
it's the one that got me in, and it was that whole story of I had no idea games could do this, and pretty quickly fell into that rabbit hole of discovering Board Game Geek, starting to find my local game store, and beginning to I think the first game I bought, it wasn't Catan, it was Lost Cities.
That's a great game right there.
Yeah, the two-player Knizia game, and that really just got me going down the rabbit hole, so to speak. The way that solo gaming came into it was that as I was kind of amassing, in that early period you have of discovering games and acquiring games.
You're like, where did that
Uh,
$1,000 just go?
exactly. I started to feel a bit of that anxiety of, okay, I've got these games surrounding me now, and how often can I get them played? Because with game groups, you have to take schedules into account and preferences into account and things along those lines. And I started to just notice I wasn't purchasing games with a solo variant in mind to
Sure.
begin with, but I started noticing that they would have one on the player count. And I'm like, well, I literally didn't even know that you could play games
Solo.
solitaire other than just solitaire
Solitaire,
card game,
literally. Yeah, yeah.
and so I started to explore the games I already owned that had them, and found that it was a really good way to, if nothing else, learn the game so that I could teach them more easily when I was trying to present them to a group. And so that's really what started it, was realizing that there are some solo games out there, and it helped to alleviate a little bit of the anxiety and stress I was feeling over having these games, getting them played.
Right. Well, and so you start playing solo games, and you're like, oh, this is cool. I enjoy this experience.
Yeah,
Where is that leap to like, I'm gonna film it? Like,
right.
so what? How does that come about?
It was a very slow leap. It wasn't something that happened right away. Um, as I began to get into games, and started to try to consume content around them, reading and BGG and
Sure.
discovering videos, I began to get interested in the different aspects of board game media, and playthroughs was one of them, and solo reviews was another. Just game general reviews in general. And part of me thought that I would enjoy doing that, but that kind of sat with me for over a year, where I thought in the back of my mind, maybe I should do something, maybe I should do something. But really, what happened was, for a large number of years, almost 20 years, I was a high school teacher. That was my vocation. And during a spring break, I had a week off, and actually it was 2 weeks off. And I said, look, I don't really have any excuses. I'm going to just try to film myself playing a game. And actually, it's a game by a designer that Pencil First has a connection with. It was a Steve Finn
Oh,
game.
sure, of course.
It was Cosmic Run was the first game I ever filmed,
Nice.
and it was just with an iPhone, and I didn't have lighting, I didn't have a microphone, I had a small little tripod in my iPhone, and honestly, my first probably, I don't know, 20 videos or so was just that. And once I did the first one and I kind of got over that idea that it was something that was almost impossible to do, things just started to kind of flow.
Cool. Actually, it's funny, a little side story on Steve. Not my first engagement and interactions with Steve was I reviewed Biblios. I had
Ah,
never met Steve. I bought off the shelf Biblios from a great game,
yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
I reviewed it, and it was a glowing review, but I sort of ridiculed the choice of monks. Like the monk bit, I had
Right.
no interest in, and
Sure.
at the time, it was really one of my earlier videos, and I was pretty active on Twitter, and it was just getting a lot of traction for that single video. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking like I don't know if I went back and checked, maybe 1,000 views types of traction, not like
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
Um, but he reached out and he was like, "Wow, your stuff gets picked up a lot, way more than my stuff, or something like that." And he was like, "I have this game Biblios Dice, which I want
Mm-hmm.
to do a Kickstarter for. Would you be interested in doing a Kickstarter preview?" Uh, and I hadn't done Kickstarter previews at the time, but
Right.
I was like, yeah, whatever, sure. And he sent it to me and then put it and did all that. But that's how I got to know Steve. And through the years of working with him, doing reviews, and then actually meeting him in person, then we started actually working on projects together. So back to you though. So you start doing these videos,
Mm-hmm.
and so how I think a lot of people are so people who view this tend to either be Kickstarter creators or board game developers or designers. It's sort of an interesting group of folks that watch these videos. But I think a curious question is sort of, so how did it go from you're working on your solo review, like what are the steps that became you're now part of working in board game breakfast, or like how did this dice tower relationship, because you didn't just, there are a lot of contributors to the dice tower.
Sure. Sure.
You've taken it, you've got all the way through the lineup, so like how did
Right.
you meet them and start engaging with them?
Well, first of all, I'll preface it by saying I wish that I could say that it was all done with a great purpose and plan, because it
Sure.
absolutely was not. That's just not how it happened. And the impression I get in the short time that I've been in, board game as a business is that oftentimes it's not as a result of a long-term plan. It's relationships that you build over time, and that's exactly what happened. The initial connection with the Dice Tower was strictly I had um, filmed some solo playthroughs, and I'd been doing that for a while, and I'd been a huge fan of the Dice Tower, and had watched pretty much most of their shows, but definitely would watch Board Game Breakfast. And I seem to remember that he had just kind of mentioned offhand, he being Tom Vassell, if you are interested in contributing, contact me. And so that's really what I did. Was I shot a short little, I think at the time it was maybe 3 or 4 minute clip about solo gaming, and I just did a cold email to him and said, "Hey, this is who I am. This is my channel. This is my idea." Not really, honestly, and I say this without false hubris. I did not expect to hear anything,
Sure,
because
sure.
I figure he's getting a lot of submission requests, and he responded within a day and said, "Okay, well, send me what you've got." Actually, I didn't send him the video right away. I sent him the kind of the pitch,
Right.
and I sent him the video, and he said, "Okay, make it 2 minutes." And he gave me 2 or 3 other pieces of constructive criticism, and I did that, and I sent it back, and he said, "Okay, it's going to go up Monday." And I was flabbergasted.
Right, right,
I
right.
thought, okay, it can't be this, it can't be this quick. And so that's really what happened. That Monday, the first segment I did for Board Game Breakfast aired, and then I did it weekly for about 2 years. And it
Well,
was really,
that's a commitment. That's a lot.
yeah. Now they're short little videos. They're 2 minute videos, but I will tell you there are plenty of times where even getting a 2 minute video done, depending on what's happening in your life, can be a little challenging. And so, like you said, it's that consistency. I think that
Oh
was
yeah,
important to me. I wanted to be consistent.
for sure. I actually just had a call with Lincoln, and he was talking about game night and how one he also a big part of his story is getting into Catan and Catan getting him into the game industry. But setting
Hmm.
that aside, that committing to the like I think it was every other week, but that every other week video every
Hmm.
time without fail on time. I mean, is a
Right.
big deal. And from my, I've not done any segments for Board Game Breakfast, but from my experience in terms of talking with other creators and people who have been on it, it's not dissimilar from you. It's very much, hey, we want to do a clip. It's very much a content engine getting filled, and I think
Yes.
Tom has somewhat of a pro like giving exposure, letting people get their content out there, and it really is send them an email. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's
Right.
changed recently, but my last time I thought about it and talked to people about it probably a couple of years ago was send him an email. He's going to ask you for a sample.
Right.
If it seems interesting and it works,
Right.
that's about it.
That's still from at least as far as I know. Obviously, I don't quite know all of the machinations of how Tom chooses what he chooses, but it's still generally about that. And look, it's a tremendous platform. I mean, I went from I don't remember what the numbers were because I've never, been a huge numbers person as far as like subscribers and things along those lines. I mean, of course, I pay attention to it, but if you make that your solitary metric, it can be very crushing,
Sure,
depending
sure,
on
sure.
how
Yeah.
quickly you're expecting that to go up. But I went from a very small subscriber count to being on Board Game Breakfast was a huge signal boost. It's just
Sure.
a tremendous platform to be given access to, and so as I said, it was important for me to try to be consistent and do that. But what really I would say was even more important than that was working with the Dice Tower at conventions. At the time, I was living in Indianapolis, which is home to Gen
Sure,
Con.
sure.
And in addition to that, it's actually home to a tremendous gamer community outside of Gen Con.
For
I
sure.
mean, so many fantastic designers live in and around Indianapolis, and gaming groups and great game stores. And it's just a very thriving gaming community, I found. And being able to go easily to Origins and Gen Con, working with the Dice Tower at the convention in the booths, um, was, I think, really important because you can formulate relationships. And again, I wasn't doing it with the aim of getting a job at the Dice Tower. And I mean this in all seriousness. That notion was that wasn't even in my mind, right?
Right.
I was a teacher, and I'd been doing it for a number of years, and I wasn't necessarily looking to bolt to board game media, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm in this, 20-year, career with
right,
benefits and retirement plans and all
sure,
those sort of things.
right, yeah. There are some aspects that you're right. Um, but just working with Tom and other people in the Dice Tower over a couple of years, we formed relationships, and then when an opportunity presented itself, I did something very similar, which is I just reached out to Tom. So,
Yeah. And so in terms of that, so just taking that leap though, for the because I know, I don't know about the Dice Tower, but I think people a lot of times publishers, especially medium sized and smaller size, but maybe the Dice Tower as well, will just ask for support at conventions, right? They're
mhm.
looking for people to man a booth, come on, maybe, whether it's paid or however that works, but it's usually a pretty open call for people to sort of become available. Was it how? I guess my question is, how did you find yourself in a Dice Tower booth? Like, what happened there?
From what I remember, because the first time I worked at a booth was a few years back. I'm pretty sure that I reached out to Tom and said, "Hey, I'm living in Indianapolis. I'm local. Could you use any help at the booth?" And he said, "Of course." And
He's like,
and
can
you
you empty
know,
boxes?
there were plenty. Yeah, as you know, there are plenty of things to do at a convention. If you're not busy, it's because you're not trying to be.
Yeah,
And so he was of course appreciative for help, but he also, I mean, there was without getting into too much detail, I mean, there were benefits on my end as well.
yeah,
But I was really just doing it because I wanted to,
sure.
especially at the time, it was wonderful to meet Tom and Z and Eric and Sam at the time, and just kind of also meet other people that were submitting segments to the different shows, because there at that time there was Board Game Breakfast and Board Game Blender and
Right.
Token Punch Lunch. There were all of these shows, and the conventions were when you had a chance to meet these people, and it's like that way, not
Yeah,
just for Dice Tower.
and I think maybe non-media folks like I think publishers see it and perhaps media, but like conventions oftentimes are a hub for media creators and content creators to connect, right?
Sure.
Whether they're at their doing their live streaming and live shows, or just people walking around, right? Like just like designers get to see each other at conventions, content creators get to see each other at
Right.
conventions, and like get to know each other and discuss what's happening and how things are going. But I think those, there's the Dice Tower one, there's the Board Game Geek one, the like media center, each convention's a
Sure.
little different, become sort of hubs for people to meet and talk and connect. So certainly, whether you want to do YouTube videos or design a board game or whatever, going to cons and finding the time and the space to engage and talk with with folks is a huge deal. I remember weird, crazy happenstance at a convention. I was walking around some hall, and at the time, do YouTube videos. I was in the yellow party thing,
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm just like sitting and talking and whatever, and then it's Bruno Cathala, Bruno Fiducci, and Antoine Bausa are just all standing together, just
I know.
talking, right? And you're like, what's going on?
Very surreal, yeah.
Very surreal. Very surreal. And then, like, I didn't even stay late, but like, I'm walking, and Bruno Fiducci was like, and that might not be the way that you pronounce his last name. But I don't know what happened, but he's like, "Are you going over there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going over there." He's like, "Oh yeah, let's go over there." And so we just walked, whatever, to some other event, and talked about random stuff. But like, it's like that doesn't happen when you're stuck at home, unfortunately.
No, it does not. And one of the many things I'm sure that we're all missing about going to conventions, is for, and I've heard the different terms, it's almost like it's summer camp, it's like your one time a year to get together with people that you don't have opportunity to other times. And so that's a huge part. I mean, I think that for many of the publishers, there's also, of course, business considerations that are, huge impacts. But at least on a personal level, it's difficult to know that it may be another year or longer before you're going to be able to see some of these people that you haven't seen and you look forward to. It's really challenging.
Hopefully things open up, sooner. But in the context of like, will 100,000 people be in a tight convention anytime soon? Like, that's probably not going to happen.
Not looking good. No.
Yeah. Okay, so you played Catan, you started seeing solo, then you did the videos, Board Game Breakfast, helping out. All right, that's all. Like, then there's you have a die cartoon. What do you guys call?
We call them. I think we just call them dice guys.
Dice guys. You have a dice guy, right? That's like this. Actually, you've reached another tier. You have a dice guy. What?
Yes.
So how did that? So what is this? It sounded like you were suggesting that you just were like, "Hey Tom, you need me on full time?" Like, how did you pick up the video editing and the content stuff actually for the Dice Tower?
I'm going to answer that, but I am going to divert to the dice guy thing because this is something I've talked about a few times. That was when I was still. That was when I was doing Board Game Breakfast.
Oh, that was pre. Oh.
That was pre all of this, and so when I got my dice guy, I'm telling you, it was like this, almost like this badge of honor. I cannot tell you how excited I was. The artist that creates those, her name is Tina, and I want to say her last name, but I'm afraid of mispronouncing it. I think it's Buongiorno, which is I'm Italian, and that sounds very Italian. But she's fantastic, and I did get a chance to meet her at a convention not somewhat recently. But when I got that was like this huge, I don't know, I felt like I had kind of made it at that point. And that was before I even had a job. But I just thought it was funny you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So for the the position here at the Dice Tower, this was something that I knew would entail a pretty significant life change.
You moved,
Uh,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
And you
And
moved to
so
Florida, right? I mean,
I'm,
this is a long move.
it is a long move, and I had to consult obviously with my wife and family considerations. There were a number of things to take into account, and as you mentioned, as a teacher, there are certain things that you are going to give up if you leave a profession like that. And so it was a huge consideration before I even approached Tom, not thinking that I had a chance at all, but I didn't even want to approach him before I had
Oh,
had those
sure.
thoughts, discussions, considerations taken into account. And so once I had come to the conclusion that whether I went to the Dice Tower or not, I was ready to leave teaching. That was really the big thing, was that I
Sure.
had felt that I had been at a point where teaching is not a job I feel that you should do if you are not feeling 100% in, because it doesn't just affect you, it affects
The
over
kids,
100
right?
kids every
Right.
day, right?
Right.
And so I hadn't gotten to a point where I was jaded or
Sure.
dreaded going into work every day, but I was determined I was not going to allow myself to get there.
Sure.
And
I
so I knew
understand.
that within the next couple of years, I wanted to transition out. I don't know if I cut you off there.
No, no, no. I was just acknowledging that it's good to not be a teacher that gets burnt up, a husk of a teacher, and ruins a bunch of kids' day. I mean, like,
But,
I think that's a good thing. I was just
oh,
responding to that.
I appreciate that. I think we've both seen that, right? I think everyone has seen those teachers that probably either never should have gotten into the game or should have
Sure.
gotten out many years before they did. And so I was determined not to be one of those. And so once that kind of switch had gone off in my brain, then I started saying, okay, well, it would be, a dream to go and do something that's a passion of mine, work
Right.
work in board games. And so I did something very similar, which is, now I had had a bit more of a relationship with
Sure.
Tom
Sure.
at that point, because I felt like working at the conventions, over a number of conventions, because I had gone to Dice Tower convention in Florida. Um, and I'd worked with them at Dice Tower at Gen Con a number of times, and Origins a number of times. I felt like I had established a bit of he'd seen a work ethic. He had seen kind of how I
Sure.
interact with other people. Look, these are all things that
Your
don't come.
broadcaster voice. You
Sure.
have the full package.
Well, I appreciate that. But these are all things that can't come through on a CV, right?
Sure. Sure.
And so I emailed him because I knew that there were changes that were occurring at the Dice Tower. And I just said, look, I don't know exactly where you're at, if you have people in mind, or if you're looking to even hire more people. Although I believe I had heard that he was looking. I just said, I just would like to let you know simply that I'm open to opportunities if you have
Right.
interest. I,
Right.
I basically just kind of threw that out there. And that just started a discussion. It just started a back and forth, and we started talking about what he might have in mind and what it would entail. I think rightfully on his part, he wanted to make sure that I understood the implications of, hey, okay, are you comfortable moving, thousands of miles away, and all these types of things, because, that's it's an investment in both parts, not necessarily financial, but,
Sure. No,
there's
it's a big deal.
it is. And so we just eventually came to an agreement, and it was a huge change, and it has been a huge change.
I mean, and it's pretty fresh. I mean, you said November, right?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's less than a year, and then on top of it, we have all of these changes that are occurring as a result of the pandemic, and of course that has changed things too, because so much of the job at the Dice Tower is built around that convention cycle. You know what
Sure.
I mean?
Sure. Sure. Right. Yeah.
Uh, in a non-pandemic year, you're traveling to potentially 6, 7 conventions a year, and
Right.
perhaps more. Not the whole team doesn't necessarily always go to every convention,
Sure,
but
but I mean, the Dice Tower has a presence at more than six conventions, right? I mean, they're
sure,
everywhere, right?
exactly. There's 2 Dice Tower conventions in and of themselves, plus the cruise, so
Right.
there's 3 right there. And so that obviously has changed things, and so we've, like every, I think, board game uh, media company, has had to kind of adjust. And I say
Well, I
we,
yeah,
Tom.
yeah. Well, but I would imagine that on the flip side, the advantage that the Dice Tower and Tom have compared to a lot of other publishers, a lot of other folks in the board game industry today, is it's a media company. It's not
Sure.
a publisher or
Right.
a convention. I
Right.
mean, you're running conventions, but and so right now the appetite is really high for digital content, right?
That
Like
is true.
everyone's looking for ways to connect and engage. So I would imagine the Dice Tower has a leg up on a lot of folks, um, in terms of understanding different platforms, understanding,
Sure.
YouTube versus Twitch versus this versus that, and also given board game like access to a very broad creator space in a way that you guys have been churning through for the last decade.
Right.
So so and so then how did was the video editing part of it from the beginning, or were they like, we're not going to cons, so you're editing videos? Like, well, how did the
No, that came into it from the beginning, and I had to be, very transparent about this. I'm not, I'm of an age that I've heard enough horror stories that I'm not going to present myself as something that I'm not. Um,
sure?
and I did not have a huge background in video editing. I don't think that my technical skills are what I lead with. I'll just put it to you that way.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
I had worked exclusively with iMovie. I happened to have a Mac, and so when I made my videos, that's what I
iMovie's
used
easy to
because
use.
right, it was pretty user friendly, and so that's what I use. Now, thankfully, uh, Dice Tower works with Final Cut Pro, which is basically the souped up version. So I had a bit of a background, but I was very, transparent and said, look, this is my skill set when it comes to,
And I don't learn new tricks.
well, I like to think that even at my highly advanced age, Ed, that I am willing to, I'm not going to be one of those people that say I can't learn that, um, because there's been a pretty steep learning curve, but I already have, I feel like my skills have improved dramatically in Final Cut, and I had not used Photoshop at all, and now I'm gaining more proficiency in Photoshop and things along those lines. So um, that was part of it, and Tom was very clear that look, this is going to be kind of a jack of all trades type of a thing where you're going to be doing video. There were very specific shows. Like I knew I was going to be editing Board Game Breakfast, for example. And so, from the beginning, I've edited Board Game Breakfast and the Week in Review show and have picked up other things over time. And then he said, and you could do your reviews as well. And so I've been doing, about 2 reviews a week. I've been focusing on the solo reviews just because that's kind of a niche that I've created. And
Sure.
honestly, during this time period, there's more interest in solo games than ever before.
And I mean, that was a already peaking
Yes.
curve of interest. I mean, you doing the solo videos was in line with the growth of solo play.
I yeah.
You know,
I lucked out. I
yeah.
stumbled into that. Really, I do believe that I came into making solo content at exactly the right time. You had some biggies, right? You had Ricky Royal, who had been doing his reviews for a long time and just tremendous work. And, there were a number. I always hate to mention anybody because then I'm going to forget 20, 30 people.
Sure.
So, but I will just put it in a more broad sense. I think I came in on the early end of solo content and kind of lucked into that because there have been a lot of people that have done it, frankly, better, but they came in later, and so it's been harder for them to
Oh yeah,
kind of make that ground.
the amount of creators in the space is gigantic, especially when you move back to all you need is a cell phone,
Right.
to do it. And I think that in many ways, solo plays often, especially for playthroughs, easier to film in that
Sure.
you're typically over your shoulder type look.
Right.
But actually, I think that's a nice transition. So we've talked about the Dice Tower stuff, and presumably it's going great. You're enjoying it.
Very happy. Yes.
To transition to more specifically to solo play,
Mhm.
as we just were talking about, solo modes and versions have been really booming,
Yeah.
and in part probably because of community around social gaming getting more of a voice. Probably a big piece of Kickstarters and a few other places that have really gotten those out there. But when you think about just the actual product, when you're like the solo games I started when I started my videos versus the solo games now, what do you think are some of the big shifts or changes you've seen in experiencing solo games today from 5 years ago or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be interested to see if you have some similar thoughts, because obviously you've got, at least I assume that you've got somewhat of a solo gaming background or interest, because so much of what you have been involved with has had solo variants.
Yeah. I mean, I both in terms of playing. I mean, in a sense, if you do board game development, whether you're playing with yourself representing yourself or you're playing yourself
Sure.
representing four players, you
Right.
often are touching and engaging. But my background originally was video games before
Mm,
board games, and so a lot of that ends up being you playing a game.
sure.
And so no, I'm a big fan of solo games. And yeah, so anyway, yes, I have a interest in solo. But my question was to you.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I get distracted
Yeah.
easily. The biggest differences I've noticed is, well, there's a couple. Number one is kind of the rise. I don't know if this is coining a phrase, the rise of the automa, this idea of the automa decks, right?
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily new,
No.
but that becoming kind of almost nomenclature or shorthand for an AI deck, right?
Yeah.
And so
I
Morton
almost feel like Jamie did that. Jamie Stegmaier. I don't know if I feel like when it become he like the Automa or whatever.
I'm not
Like
sure of the pronunciation. Yeah.
I think there was a company that was working with him doing those rules that like had that in their name, and he called it.
Yes.
That's the mode he started naming it versus solo. Um,
Correct.
so I sort of feel like he might have coined that, but of course everyone's gonna be like, no way, not him. Three
Right.
guys before
The
him.
the name, I'm pretty sure, started with Morton Monrad Peterson, who
Oh,
is the
great.
guy who does the Automa factory, or the Automa
Oh,
factory
okay. So
that
yeah,
works with Jamie, right?
yeah. Well, the
And
signal boost came from Jamie, I guess is the way it's
exactly,
right.
exactly. And so that that has been one of the big things, is that now that's become kind of shorthand for an AI deck. And so to me, the biggest shift that I've seen is there's more of a focus on an actual AI opponent versus a high score. And so, because in many of the kind of early popular solo games, like some of the Uwe games, those tended to be high score variants, right?
Uh,
Where play the game and it's an optimization puzzle, you're an efficiency puzzle. You're always trying to get that highest score, and that's fine. And depending on the game, there are certain games that lend themselves to that better than others.
yeah.
But kind of having this idea of a clear win-loss condition, different interaction points that you're able to abstract through an AI system. To me, the trickiest thing is being able to do that in a way where it doesn't require so much upkeep and brain power from the player. To me, there's a very clear thing. If I'm having to spend more time on the AI turn figuring out how that works than I am on my own, that's a problem.
Who was I? I was just talking to somebody. Maybe it was Keith. I don't remember, but that exact. It's like if I don't feel like whoever was talking was same exact thing. I don't want to be the player playing all the other players
Right.
for me. It's I absolutely agree with that trend. I also fully agree that there is a strong engagement and bias towards that trend. Like more often than not, the negativity I get from a solo game from like reviewers or people who are in the solo space will be because a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are um, high score or puzzly.
Sure.
They're not necessarily automa decks,
Right.
AI decks. Is people are like, oh well, it's just a high score. Like that's sort of you. It's close to being like they just use roll and move, right? Like it's got
Yes.
that
Yes. It's a
pejorative
pejorative.
connotation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, nice use of
How you like
pejorative, sir. Um,
that?
and It's a power word.
It is.
But the weird thing for me is I actually tend to still prefer, like, I find, like, if I want to play with an interactive opponent, to me at that point, like, I'd prefer to play a video game, right? Like, there's some part of it where I like the solitaire, like more of that solitaire feel of being able to play and working through the the reactions, the chain reactions of the way the solo is set up. The one where it's just sort of like, especially, I don't actually mind it when a deck signalizes an action or a thing that happens. I mind it more when I feel like I'm moving a pawn, and it's like, again, the versions of it where it's like, oh, it's not a solo mode, it's the 2-player mode, but where the second player is the AI. For me, albeit a very difficult challenge, and what I think people really respond to, because I get beat up when I don't do it that way. I find it's like, I'd rather go find a friend at that point, right? Like,
sure, yeah. No, I get that completely. And I'm going to mea culpa here. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I have been dismissive in the past of, oh, it's just a high score variant. There absolutely is a value judgment that's out there, and I have been guilty of that. But I will say this. I think that there's room. First of all, there's room for just high score variants. Like I said, there are some games that lend themselves well to that. But I also think that there's a nice middle ground where I think that there are times where a quote unquote AI opponent has been shoehorned into a game where it doesn't really fit, and that's not satisfying either. But what I do tend to like is something where it's a little bit more of a hybrid, where you've got high score like a matrix where you're trying to reach something, but then on top of that, you've got objectives.
Sure.
Where maybe you've got 3 objectives that you're trying to get above a score ratio, and you're also trying to complete objectives.
Right.
That to me could be very satisfying too, because it gives you, usually what it does is it forces you to not exploit one thing. It forces you to be a little bit more broad in your strategy.
Right. And well, I would say the other trend that I see more or equivalent as of late, and it is this idea of solo, not afterthought solo modes.
Oh,
solo modes that are invested into and built out.
Correct.
Such that they feel like they're intentional experiences that were sort of, a first class experience.
Yes.
I know, again, as you've said, Pencil First games have a lot of solo modes. With Keith's stuff, the conversation we often have on it is it's sort of like, what is it doing that gives you the vibe and the aesthetic of the game, right? Like, if you think of, I'm a big guy for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. It's a framework for game design, but that aesthetic is sort of the experience, the feeling you have when you're done playing, like that sense of relaxation or competitiveness or whatever. And so in a solo mode, you want to boil the aesthetic. You want this, you ideally want a similar aesthetic in your product, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, the thing with Keith is you really want the solo mode to have something interesting about it, right? Something that feels fresh or different or new. And so we always have that, like, he's sort of like, hey, can I get a deck of cards? And it's like, sure. Can I get a meeple? Sure. It wasn't your favorite, but in the 100 Tori, going and creating a character, Onatsu, who's part of it, and she has a board, and it it does its thing, but it's not like, hey, take the tiles and make a shape in front of you. It was like that board is only for that.
Correct.
Right.
And that's a really big, a really important point. Intentional, and part of the design process, potentially from the beginning, is also a trend that I would echo that, and I think that it's something that solo gamers are becoming more and more almost expectant of. Now, I don't want to say, because I cannot and I will not speak for all solo gamers,
Sure.
But I do think that there's a perception out there that solo gamers can be very vocal about, why isn't there a solo mode? Is there a solo mode? why are you making it a stretch goal? There's all of these red flags. It's like, okay, well, if it's a stretch goal, then has it even been developed, or are you just going to throw something on at the last minute? And so I think that it is becoming more and more of something where, hey, look, this is a part of the game from the beginning. It's been part of the design process. It's already in play testing along with the rest of the game, or maybe it's already through play testing, depending on where in the development cycle you may be. But that I would agree with you, and that does matter because reputations, they're like we were saying, it's a huge market. There's a lot, new publishers getting in seemingly every day, and you're competing with a lot of other games out there, and if you start to get the reputation of, oh, these solo modes are, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It could be a problem.
I think it's true, and the way I would put it in a weird way, and it's not political, but solo gamers have done a good job of making a really tight minority voting block.
Yes, it's very true.
It isn't necessarily the vast majority of players who want solo experiences, but they've done a really good job of, this is really sort of a Kickstarter thing, but like being vocal, being clear, having enough people who are interested in it to, it's like, oh, you did that. They came, right? Like they have the ability to show up and move the needle.
Yes.
And because of that, a Kickstarter creator, pays attention. Like in contrast to like trying to put like, so this is a for Kickstarter creators watching this video, it would make a lot of sense. When you're running a Kickstarter, what are the things you hear about? Well, one thing you hear about is, what's your solo game? Everything you just said. A different example would be, does your insert fit sleeves? How does sleeves work? Sleeves.
Right.
Here's the difference, and you need to understand it. And the sleevers are a block, right? Like they do know it. There's enough of them that they'll ask, and you'll. But what is an interesting difference is the sleevers don't have content and social media spread like the solos do. The solos have people doing videos. They talk about, like, because it's this experience more than just like a component quality thing. I feel like, I feel like appeasing is not the right word. Engaging with, and involving and creating content for solo gamers brings a lot of reach and growth to your Kickstarter, which is a little different than like, here's some other problem with the Kickstarter, or gray miniatures versus color miniatures, or again, all these little examples of people who are particular. I feel like the solo gaming scene has been different, and I think as the quality bar has gone up, and as people realize and think about, oh, that one player mode in this box isn't just a lesser version of what you've been doing with your friends, but like actually something you should check out. Like, what is this what is this component? It's part of solo. I think, if anything, one of the things I cringe at more and more now is lots of people post, I'm checking out the solo mode because we're going to have people over and I want to learn how to play. And oftentimes it's more like, I wouldn't learn how to play that way. Like, you're learning how to play a different game. But no, it's super interesting. What have been some memorable ones for you where that stood out, in terms of like, you played the solo experience and you're like, that was awesome?
Well, boy, this is so hard because I play a lot of solo games, but some things that have kind of stuck out are games that I didn't necessarily think should work as a solo game, but have, and so that's so like an area control game, right? That is really tough to pull off solo. And so there's one game that it's not necessarily a high profile game. It's called Petra Core, where
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, right. You are basically playing as clouds, and you're moving these clouds around a little grid, and you've got little glass beads that represent water, and when the clouds bump together, the water spills, and you're trying to grow what's on the tiles. And that had an AI deck that was really, really elegantly done, didn't require a lot of administration on the part of the player, and it pulled off a really nice experience for an area control game, which is hard to do. So I think that was terrific. I will, and I'm not you didn't ask, and so I'm not trying to just
Sure.
blow smoke, but I really did enjoy the Sunset Over Water AI system quite a bit. I think that that's a really good solo game, and that's one that I like because it kind of fits the sweet spot of it evokes that aesthetic that you were talking about, right? I feel like the multiplayer game that I play of Sunset Over Water gives me a very similar experience to the solo game,
Right.
and I appreciate that. And I love the aesthetic of the game in general.
Right.
And I think Keith designed that
Yeah.
solo
For
variant, right?
yeah, Steve Finn designed the
Right.
game, and Keith did the solo. And yeah, and it's another example too where it carries the same aesthetic. It uses the same
Mhm.
mechanics. However, ultimately, it ends up being a little bit more puzzly,
Right.
and
Right.
the inclusion of the cabin tiles
Mm-hmm.
makes it feel like, again, playing Sunset Over Water solo
Mm-hmm.
feels very different
Mm-hmm.
than playing the multiplayer game.
It does.
Arguably more relaxing in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that one for me fits the bill of it's evocative of the game, but it has enough of its own that it feels like you're doing something different. Like whereas, so Herbaceous,
Mm-hmm.
I thought was great because Steve did this like super lightweight Biblios, and then
Right.
for the solo game, Keith, who's a fan of Biblios, was like, "I'm going to bring in a third decision like Biblios." Um,
Right.
I like that one because it's one of the fastest solo games where I feel like I can just like play it and you
Yes.
can like roll through it like really fast. You can do the second
Mm-hmm.
half to make it hard, but like there's a speed to it.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and originally Herbaceous was supposed to be a solitaire game, and I just utterly failed at, and that's how I got to Steve on it. But that's a whole
Ah,
other story.
okay.
Yeah, I just that it started with Beth's art, and it was like this should just
Mm.
be a solitaire game you play. There's a giant book Seth Johnson got me, which is like 549 solitaire games with a deck of cards. It's a
Ah,
cool book.
okay.
It's an older book. Anyway,
Yeah.
but Herbaceous, Sunset Over Water, Sprouts, for
Mm-hmm.
me, while I actually I enjoy the solo,
Mm-hmm.
it ultimately that one's more like an Anima deck.
Right.
You're playing the player is taking tiles from you. It's sort
Correct.
of an area control game in a way,
Sure.
and it's fun. Like I enjoy it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
mechanically sound, but
Sure.
it feels a little bit more like I'm playing the opponents, like as if I was just I enjoy Herbaceous more with other people
Sure.
than in solo, because I feel like it's like it, but not a little different. The cool
Right.
thing about that whole experience was how, and sorry, the rival tokens ended up being used in lower player count. So the
Mm.
cool thing about Sprouts, from my perspective, is that actually there's this really sort of natural solo rival deck that is the like card you don't choose. Like
Right.
you always want to have a card that all the players don't choose. In this case, that last card, unless you're playing like with four people,
Sure.
does something to the game.
Right.
That's a big part of the solo play, but sort of got looped through the whole experience.
Right.
It's really, they're all interesting little different challenges.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I think that you'll find, with solo games, is that depending on the type, like so you go back to I was talking about kind of the Uwe games, because those were some of the earliest solo games I played, with things like Agricola
Sure.
and Gates of Loyang and things like that. Those are they don't try to be really almost anything but puzzles. They're efficiency puzzles, right? And so that's one family of solo game that is tremendously satisfying. I mean, I love efficiency puzzles, not just in solo games. I mean, there are multiplayer games that are big
Yeah, sure.
efficiency.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
my favorite game is Scythe, and to me, that's a massive efficiency puzzle, or disguised as
Oh yeah,
something else.
a lot of worker placement and engine builders, which
Right.
are and I think in solo, next to efficiency puzzle, maybe even before that, or probably next to it, is the logic puzzles, right?
Right.
I think the
Right.
distinction between efficiency and logic to a degree is efficiency is you're going to do the same game over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, whereas most of the time a logic puzzle is like, no, there's 90 puzzles,
Right.
you're going to play through all of them, and then you'll have, and then maybe like relics of Raja Vihara or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that soul game that came out, which I don't know if you did you play it? Did you
I
get
don't
it?
know that I've played that
Oh
actually.
man, you should look. I mean, well, okay.
Okay.
What's neat about it is it's the crate pushing Tomb Raider Zelda game. So
Okay.
basically, it's a logic puzzle where you set up a bunch of crates and then you're pushing them around and doing chain reactions and things like
Right.
that. Um, but what he ended up doing, which was really neat, is you like play through whatever 50 levels, 70 levels of
Hmm.
content, all of which is one use, right? You figure out the
Right.
puzzle, you're done.
Sure.
He then has this sort of efficiency puzzle at the end of the logic puzzles where it's like, hey, set up the board this way, grab tiles from the back, like basically do
Mm,
this random setup, and
right.
then it's more of what would be like that sort of efficiency model.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Okay, but so we have we're talking about the different categories: logic, efficiency, uh, and then it sounded like after that you were going to talk more about the modern designs.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. It's just that there are so many different types of experiences that are available to you as a solo gamer, depending on what your kind of preference is. And so I was saying you have those, but you also can, if you want to have an area control experience that is available. Now, it's not necessarily going to be the same. I don't know that you're ever going to be able to recreate that getting in your opponent's head. That's just something that I don't know that you can really pull off with a solo deck. You can do some type of, you know, I can deduce, I can kind of do a little bit of counting of, okay, well, my probabilities are such that it's more likely that the AI is going to do this than not, but that's different than having the truly random element of another human being at the
Yeah,
table.
well, and it there hasn't been a good. No one has really solved table talk or bluffing or
Right.
all those things where some video games start doing that a little bit, but at a pen and paper stage, it's a little harder. I think
Sure.
some interesting categories, and we've actually gone for quite a while, so
Oh,
let's wrap.
yes.
But some interesting categories. Like I'll try to process this video, and my machine will be like, the is one dedicated solo games, right?
Hmm.
Broader, longer, deeper experiences.
Yes.
Usually, a hallmark of those is a lot more narrative or a lot more sense of player progression and sort of stage challenges
Right.
and or narrative decision trees.
Like
Um,
Nemo's War would be
yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
and even a little lighter, but also has its own Kickstarter stories. Is Unbroken. I don't know how many people have
Mm,
actually gotten and played it, but
I've played
not
that.
a lot of that is still just sort of managing your time efficiency and
Sure.
but that sort of like sense of I like that. I always like the thematic premise of like it's basically Die Hard. You start at the bottom of it. It's like revenge your
Right.
way up.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so there's interesting things. You know what? I'll give you a little pencil first games reveal just
Ah,
because we're
nice.
talking. It wasn't even planned. Um, but so Skull Hollow
Yes.
was a just vehemently um, 2-player game, right? Not
Yes.
not three
Very much.
players, not 4 players, not 1 player.
Right.
That was a
2 player.
time when I walked away from the voting block. I was like, guys, I'm just not. I'm telling you,
Right.
we're not doing it.
Right.
And so it's something we've always been talking about. And so one of the things that we did, and it's just a different type of solo experience, is, and it's not done,
Okay.
but
But you have me intrigued already. I'm going to tell you. You mentioned Skull Hollow, and now you're mentioning a
well,
solo experience. You definitely have my
I've
attention.
got two things, and it wasn't even the intent of this, but it is interesting. So, Skull Hollow 2-player game, Kickstarter, retail, it's out. We're working on Mall Peak, which is a
Right.
standalone sequel, but that is fully interchangeable, and perhaps will allow for 3 or 4 players if you really want. Like
Ah.
perhaps it's gonna,
Okay.
but because you're gonna have the content. But the
Right.
so for solo, we were like bouncing around talking about what could we do for solo, and one of the things that we've been interested and I just like the Skull Collar universe and building it out and
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about it, and so we're sort of looking at a couple things. The first thing is, and this one's real,
Hmm.
is so we have this skull. It's called Skull Solo. It's going to be different,
Okay.
but
All right.
this is a solo narrative adventure that's
Okay.
effectively it's like 30 cards. This
Okay.
was actually is designed by Jesse Wright and Eric Slauson with me and Keith and everyone
Mm.
involved in. But essentially, the Foxen are part of Skull Hollow. Maul Peak is
Okay.
bears. So
Okay.
and they're and like they're foxing in like the the forest, and bears in the Arctic mountain in like a
Sure.
mountaintop. And so basically, and this narrative in those games are all about the player experience. But in this case, basically you're playing as an Arctic fox who's basically traveling from Skull Peak to Mall Peak, Skull Hollow to Mall
Okay.
Peak. And so what this is more like that Unbroken style, where
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like a narrative choose your own adventure game where you have like time and resources you're
Sure.
using, but basically the way you play through this and the decisions you make, it's all scratch off. So you like, do you help the guy? Do you use the canteen? Do you do the thing?
Right.
Right. So it's not a logic puzzle. It's not an efficiency
Mm-hmm.
puzzle. This is much
Okay.
more of a narrative experience
Right.
where, and then as you make decisions, you have like honor and not honor, compassion, and wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, how you perform going through your narrative experience is like moving those meters. And so the
Right.
neat thing is then, so it's like this is a one-time thing, right? Like
Okay. Yeah.
you're gonna play through it. You're gonna make your choices. Sort of like
Mm-hmm.
a legacy. It's a little bit more like a legacy experience in a way, because
Okay.
then after you go through that, you do each page, you then get to the end, and then you're going to have this Arctic fox who's going to be playable.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
the
Okay.
ability he has and the things he has was a result of the play.
Ah, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
And,
Yeah.
and what really is interesting about it is also, this is Seth Johnson, who's an incredible writer. This is actually world building in a way we don't do anywhere else in the game, where like you have characters talking and engaging
Sure.
with each other and running through this little thing. So this is piece number one, which is
Okay.
this idea of this is sort of like, I'm not going to give you the solo you want, but maybe I'm going to give you a different one
Sure.
that you find interesting, and hey, I'm going to throw it in for free, so don't get mad at me.
Right.
But this has been really fun to make, and I think
I
we're going to
bet.
end up making a bunch of these sort of.
Okay.
But the other one, which gets to a lot of what we talked about, is how do you bring actual solo experience to the proper Skull Call play? And Justin, who's now become he started as a fan, sort of like getting engaged.
Sure.
Has been doing a bunch of play testing on Mall Peak for us, because
Okay.
like you get people who give you these write-ups on your original game, and you're like, you know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, that's always helpful.
He actually made a solo Guardian. And so what I thought was really interesting is a lot of times I had walked away from Solo and Skulk was the Automa thing. It's like, really, you're just going to make a deck that's going to have to be so bland because you're going to want it to work with, like, everything about Skulk Hollow is about a variety of modes and challenges and abilities and all that stuff. But then also the like that it's like chess, where it's like, no, if you do a bad move, the guy can kill you round 3, right? Like, it's not like
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I know that from experience. Yeah.
yeah. And so that was always a struggle point. And so what's interesting is what he did, like, again, just like for fun, and it's available. An early version of this was available on BGG as like a print and play, and we're just messing with it. But basically, what he did is he made a unique Guardian.
Okay.
That's essentially the Automa Guardian. I think.
Okay.
And so the way he solved it, which I thought was so interesting, and interesting enough that we're like, should we do this thing? What do we? How would it work? Does it fit in the box? Is like the hook for it is it's a Guardian with its own hit points, its own abilities. So what I like about it is it's fully built to be played against as a robotic, like a reactive character. So
sure,
it's all like the moves there's more AoE, right? Like there's more moves that allow for smarter use of space that versus somebody like, because it doesn't know exactly what it's doing, right? Like
right.
It's smarter in that sense. And then what he did is it does have an Automa deck.
Okay.
But it's not a random Automa deck. It's the Automa deck for this creature.
Sure.
And it's his turn. You flip it, and you're like, oh no, he used this attack.
Right.
But the novel thing, and I don't know if it's 100% novel, but what I really like is there's a second deck, which is the what happens when you attack it deck, which is essentially if you strike the monster or jump on the monster, which isn't a mechanic in Skull Hollow.
Right.
You flip a card and like it tells you, did your ability hit? like was it? It was it's a little like a die roll. Did it
Sure.
hit? With decent odds. But then, what reaction did the monster do? So like, you jump on, you strike its shoulder,
Right.
you hit, but it grabs you and it throws you to the ground.
Gotcha.
So it's like a really interesting mix of both just the automa thing, but with something that feels a little bit less like it's just they're both decks, but
Right.
I always feel like people. I did a video on like what people hate in games, and a lot of it's like me when something passive happens to me, like the game just beats me over and over. So like, but like when it's like, no, I hit the monster and the monster got angry at me and did something back.
Right. That's a little bit different. It's a reaction. It's not just I can see that.
So this is stuff. This is all in the cauldron right now.
All right. Well,
it'll be cool. This one's real. We're definitely this one is for sure about to happen. And I hopefully you're like that was a fun little hour. Like
for sure.
Right. But you'll have to. We'll get you once these things come together. I'll get you a copy, and you can.
It's not
a Dice Tower thing. Just for your opinion, let us know.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I'd be very interested because I do love that world as well. I think that it's a pretty unique game that you guys have come up with there.
Yeah, we're really happy with it. But thanks so much for the time. I look forward to all the solo content coming out, and we'll have to see how these games continue to develop. Like what do solo games look like 5 years from now, and how are they different? But I do have to process this video, and I am scared. So anyway, thanks for being on. It's been a pleasure, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.